Welcome to the GC BizCast, a production of J. Whitney Bunting College of Business at Georgia College and State University. Here we discuss the important topics with business leaders and educators. We produce weekly podcasts from our beautiful campus in Milledgeville, Georgia. We're excited that you've joined us. Our conversation should inform and entertain you. The views expressed are the views of the individuals on the program and do not represent the views of Georgia College and State University. So let's get started.
Hello to our audience. I'm Charlotte Joyner, sophomore marketing major. Welcome to our podcast. This episode is called Grow the Pie with Dr. Alex Edmans. To my right is Nicholas Lynch. He's a sophomore accounting major. And to my left is Mya Hassler. She's a freshman marketing major. We are joined today by you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Charlotte. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Alex Edmans is a professor of finance at the London Business School. Alex graduated from Oxford University and then worked for Morgan Stanley in investment banking and fixed income sales and trading. After a PhD in finance from MIT Sloan as a Fulbright scholar, he joined Wharton in 2007 and was tenured in 2013, shortly before moving to LBS. Alex's research interests are in corporate finance, responsible business, and behavioral finance. He is a managing editor of the Review of Finance, the leading academic finance journal in Europe, and was inducted as a fellow of the Financial Management Association. Alex has spoken at the World Economic Forum in Davos, testified in the UK Parliament, presented to the World Bank Board of Directors as part of the Distinguished Speaker Series, and given the TEDx talk, What to Trust in a Post-Truth World, and the TEDx talk, The Social Responsibility of Business, with a combined 2.4 million views. He has written for the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, and the World Economic Forum, and has been interviewed by Bloomberg, BBC, CNBC, CNN, ESPN, Fox, ITV, NPR, Reuters, Sky News, and Sky Sports. Alex serves on the steering group of the Purposeful Company, a UK consortium of leaders in responsible business, and on Royal London Asset Management's Responsible Investment Advisory Committee. The UK government appointed him, jointly with PwC, to study the alleged misuse of share buybacks and the link between executive pay and investment. Alex also serves as Mercer School Memorial Professor of Business at Gresham College, giving a 4-year program of lectures to the public. His series are on the principles of finance, the psychology of finance, business skills for the 21st century, and how businesses can better serve society. Alex's book, Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit, was featured in the Financial Times Best Business Books of 2020 and won the Financial Times Award for Excellence in Sustainable Finance Education. It is being translated into Arabic, Chinese, French, Korean, Russian, and Turkish. He is a co-author of the 14th edition of Principles of Corporate Finance. Alex was named Professor of the Year by Poets and Quants in 2021. He has won 23 teaching awards at Wharton and LBS, won the Finance for the Future Award for driving change in the finance community, and featured in Thinkers 50 Radar. Did I miss something?
Thanks for the introduction. It's great to be here. Thank you, Charlotte.
Of course. Thank you, Professor Edmans, and congratulations on being named Professor of the Year by Poets and Quants. It is such an honor for us to spend time with you today. To get us started, I wanted to ask you, please tell us about your book, Grow the Pie. Where did you find your evidence and how long did the process take?
Absolutely. Well, let me just explain, what is the pie to begin with? So the pie is the value that a company creates. And you can split that pie to investors in the form of profits or society in the form of fair taxes, fair wages, and fair prices. And often companies think that to maximize profits, I need to grab pie from society. So if the pie is fixed, the only way that I can get a greater slice is by reducing the slice of everybody else. So why is the book called Grow the Pie? It's because actually, if a company is to treat society well, to invest in its customers, invest in its workers, reduce its environmental footprint, then actually there's more value to be shared and ultimately the company might become more profitable. So why did I write the book? Is I think for far too long, people have considered social responsibility as an optional extra, as something non-core. I wanted to present the business case for it. And you ask, well, how long did it take me to gather the evidence? Actually, not that long, because I'd already gathered it. So I did work on responsible business about 15 years ago, before it was that popular. And so that was all the evidence that I had already done in my research papers. What I was doing right now is just to make it accessible for a mainstream audience. So it actually didn't take me that long to write. But I think it's important to stress that the evidence was something I gathered about 15 years ago, because nowadays, everybody thinks ESG is really important. Lots of talking heads like jumping on the bandwagon and writing about it, even though what they say might not be backed up by research. But because this is something I've worked on for a long time, it was something which is backed up by science, not just by wishful thinking.
Do you mind explaining how stakeholder capitalism offers purpose and profits?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the heart of this is the fact that the pie is not fixed, the pie is expandable. So let's just talk about workers. So there's a big debate as to whether good employee management is to pay employees as little as possible and work them as hard as possible. And you might think, well, that seems a bit sort of 19th century, but in fact, you might think of this as efficiency, right? Amazon, for example, is supposed to be famous for using labor tracking wristbands and so on. Even in a different industry like investment banking, where I used to work, a great boss was somebody who could squeeze as much of hours as possible out of his or her analysts. But I wanted to say, well, is there a different way of running a company, of actually leading your workforce by giving them more delegation, more autonomy, paying them much more than you need to, treating them as colleagues rather than just as employees? Is that something that actually leads to them being more productive in the long term? And indeed, the evidence suggests that that is something which does also lead to long-term profit. So if a company is to take its workers seriously, not only is it being moral and ethical and humane, it's also being business savvy and commercially sensible. It's actually delivering value to its greatest asset. And so the evidence behind this is suggesting it is possible to deliver both purpose and profit at the same time if you focus on the right dimensions.
Hey, Alex. In your book, Grow the Pie, you demonstrate that companies that serve a purpose tend to have the profits follow, as opposed to the Friedman notion to support the shareholders only. How do we get companies to give up the anxiety of having to support the shareholders and rather focus on serving a purpose?
Thanks. I think this is why evidence is needed, because if you were to say that actually you should just focus on purpose and not even think about profit, that seems a bit like wishful thinking, and it seems just unrealistic. Companies do need to make profit. Profit is not an evil thing. Right, who gets profit? It's shareholders, and that might be pension funds, that might be university endowments, it might be insurance companies. So companies do need to give returns to investors. But if the evidence suggests that actually, if a company is taking seriously its impact on stakeholders, it actually becomes more profitable rather than less, then I think that is the main argument that you're going to be using. So when I make these arguments to companies, I don't use moral and ethical arguments. Yes, morals and ethics are important, but there's a limitation, because what's moral for one person might not be moral for another person. One person might think, let's close down all the coal-fired power stations because of climate change. Another person might say, well, that's going to put a lot of people out of jobs, so they might have a different view as to what's moral and ethical. So that's one reason why I don't focus on that. And the second reason is that if it's only a moral and ethical case, it will always seem secondary to the business. A CEO might think, I've got to run a business, I need to deliver return to my shareholders, so that's why I put evidence and data behind it rather than just subjectivity. And like the most sort of positive reaction I've had to the book is not by CSR people, but by people who were very skeptical about it, who thought, oh, CSR or ESG is a load of rubbish. But actually, because you came at this with data and evidence and something which was balanced, then I'm now going to think about putting this seriously into practice in my company, whereas before I thought, let me just not even think about it because I think it's a waste of time.
And so to follow up on that, is there anything that you came across that really surprised you when you were doing your research?
I think what was mainly surprising is just, to me, this seems a bit like a no-brainer. And I think sort of you're nodding your heads, and the idea that you can create profits and purpose at the same time seems sort of intuitive, but it was just how entrenched the pie-splitting mindset is. How there's so many people who run businesses just only think about the short term, but also how people who think about society and want to make things better for the average citizen don't realise that businesses can be a force for good. So when a company makes a lot of money, they might think, well, that's the company's just extracted a load of value. But no, if a company makes a lot of money, at least in the long term, the only way that you can do it is by making excellent products that people want to buy and motivating your workers, otherwise they'll leave. So what was surprising is something which seems so simple is actually not obvious to many people who want to be at one extreme, let me be completely about profit and nothing else, or the other extreme, let me say profit is completely evil and businesses should be charities, when just like most things in reality, actually we want to be somewhere in the middle to understand the importance of both sides. But we do see this in like political debates. It might seem frustrating when we see two politicians debate against each other who will try to argue there's no common ground between them, when actually you can find common ground. And that's one thing I wanted to try and achieve in my book. So that's another reason for writing it right now. You might think, well, why didn't I write it 15 years ago? When actually I was doing the research, but it's right now that I see this polarization, and I thought it was particularly timely to write something which suggests, well, actually, business and society can work together rather than just fighting over a fixed pie with each other.
Did you think a different way before you started your research? And then, did your research change your own thinking? Did you surprise yourself, just to kind of go off what Mya's saying? Was this a surprise to you? Or did you kind of almost know it all along, or have a feeling?
Like expect to find.
Right. Yeah. Did you expect to find that research?
Yeah, I did have a hunch that I thought I would find something, because before you're doing research, right, to do research well takes several years. And you're only going to start the project if you think that you will find results, right? So if it's something which you thought was implausible, then probably you're not going to start that research project to begin with. So why did I think it was possible for companies that treat their workers well to do better in the long term? I was just looking at myself at the time when I just spent 2 years at Morgan Stanley, and I just saw how people's bosses treated them had a huge effect on whether they were willing to do absolutely great work or whether they were people who just sort of did the minimum possible. And so given that a lot of effort that we do as employees is discretionary, it's not like we're supervised all the time like on a factory. These are things where we're left to our own devices, particularly now that we work from home. So unless we're fully aligned with the mission of the company, we might not be bringing our best selves to work. So it was something that I thought should be there in the data, but to actually demonstrate it rigorously, that was the challenge. So why did it take me so many years to perfect the paper? Not because the idea was difficult to come up with, right? I sort of had the intuition that actually treating your work as well does better in the long term, but to demonstrate this rigorously, to address issues of causality, correlation versus causation, that's what took me so long to nail down the study.
I kind of wanted to move over into your, results that you had found in your behavioral finance research. How does the soccer game cause significant decline in the stock market? Because you had talked about.
Maybe I'll first start by talking about, why do they even think to look at soccer in the stock market? So this is actually my PhD thesis at MIT. And you might think, well, how can anybody think that for a PhD at MIT, you can look at something like soccer? So what people have studied for decades was the idea of efficient markets, the idea that stock prices are always right. The stock price takes into account the present value of all future dividends. And when traders estimate those future dividends, they're completely rational. They're taking all relevant information into account. But as you mentioned in your introduction of me, I've spent time on the trading floor with Morgan Stanley in New York City. And so the people who trade stocks, they're human beings, they're affected by emotion. So I was there in 2004, which was the European Championship. And you might think, should Americans care about the European Championship? Well, actually, many did. It might be that they were born and bred Americans, but they might be Italian-American, and they might sort of care about Italy for some heritage reason. And as the games were played out, people's emotions just changed hugely. So then when I went back to MIT for my PhD, I thought, well, can I look at the effect of emotions on the stock market? And why did I choose soccer results? You might think there's many other things that affect people's emotions. If there's a plane crash or an election result, that causes people to change their mood. However, plane crashes and elections have an economic impact. When a plane crashes, that's bad for the economy. So I found that the stock market went down afterwards. Maybe it's nothing to do with emotions. Maybe it's purely rational. Whereas the soccer result shouldn't really affect anything. Maybe there's a few industries like replica merchandise that get affected, but really this shouldn't have an effect on profits and dividends. So by showing that the stock market goes down after a country loses a soccer game, I could show that the market is irrational. So it's not just efficient, rational behavior that's driving movements in stock prices.
Right. And now, is this true of American sports too?
Yeah. Do you think that Tom Brady losing in the 2007 Super Bowl caused the financial crisis?
Well, unfortunately, you can't find it in many American sports because those are regional. So if the New England Patriots win and another team, the Green Bay Packers, lose, for example, then some Americans will be happy, but some will not. So it's hard to see what's going to happen to the overall American stock market. So that's why I had to do something like a national event, because if England lose, then the whole of England gets upset and the market goes down. Now, what are the national sports that the US plays? Well, they do play soccer, but they don't really care about it that much. So what I found in the data is that when the US soccer team loses, the market actually goes up a little bit, maybe because many people are happy that it's off their screen. But what does America care about? So you might care about basketball. And so basketball, you can look at the Olympic basketballs and the World Championships. And so for that, you found that there was a significant negative reaction to a loss. You might think about other countries than the US, maybe India and Pakistan, they care about cricket, maybe Australia cares about rugby. So when we expanded it to other sports, rugby, cricket and basketball, we still found a negative effect. The only sport we didn't find a negative effect was ice hockey. So that's one which just was against us. But when you take all 5 sports together, there is still this significant negative effect of losses.
So back to growing the pie, how can we convince companies to stick with the long-term benefit and show them that the long-term benefit is more valuable and sustainable than the short-term gain?
So I think
in the process,
part of it is the evidence that this is something which does pay off in the long term. So it's something which is backed up by data. But part of it is also to change the incentive structure of companies. So often CEOs might be paid according to 1-year profit or even 3-year profit, which is not that long term. Or often if they miss a quarterly earnings target, then the stock price goes down through the floor. So if instead we're paying CEOs according to the stock price in 5 or 7 or 10 years' time, then they're not so concerned about short-term turbulence. So if you are thinking about investing in your workers, yes, it does cost money. It does reduce your profit in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to be something which is going to be paying off. And so to the extent to which we can increase the horizons of executives by paying them for long-term performance, the greater their actions will be to grow the pie rather than to split the pie.
Right. And, Alex, kind of going along with that long-term gain, I know with current events and the growing rate of inflation, do you think that the growing rate of inflation will have a setback on, your goal of growing the pie?
Well, inflation, I think, is obviously a challenge for any type of economic growth, regardless of what model that you have. But again, these are things where people have dealt with inflation for centuries and decades, and there's some tools for that, such as monetary policy and fiscal policy. So as long as there is a government that we can trust and which is using policy effectively, then this is something which has been handled many times in the past. So this is not to make light of the fact that there's inflation challenges, but to say that we've always had inflation challenges. The whole economic cycle has booms and it's busts, it's got inflationary times and deflationary times. But the fundamentals of my thesis, which is about companies thinking about the long-term impact on their customers and their employees and their suppliers and so on, that's something which is fundamental and it matters in all economic situations. So the research that was backing the book, there's lots of papers there, but one particular one was my one on employee satisfaction. I studied 28 years of data which contained inflationary times and deflationary times. It contains some really bad crises like the financial crisis and September 11th. And what was interesting was that employee satisfaction paid off in good times and also in bad times. So it's not just something which is only a luxury when times are good and we should cut back when times are bad. It was something which was consistent in terms of how it was linked to long-term shareholder returns.
Nick and I kind of wanted to move to kind of your post-truth talk, your TEDx talk that you did was fantastic. By the way, we all watched it together, a little bit of popcorn, But I think Nick has a great question for you, so I'm going to let him take it forward.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. In recent years, I feel like we've seen an increase in fake news. Do you feel like the world is headed in this direction of almost accepting fake news more than in recent years?
Yes, I do think so. And so what might be the drivers behind this? I think just people have so strong opinions about the key issues of our time. So if the issue of our time are things like climate change or diversity or inequality, these are things that get people's blood boiling and they get very angry about. And so what this might lead to is people just accepting something which might not be true just because it supports their point of view. So just this week, there was a blockbuster study on the link between diversity and climate change, which are two things that everybody really cares about. Certainly me as an ethnic minority, diversity is something really important to me. However, people kept sharing this study all over LinkedIn, and news items like Reuters were covering it. And I actually asked somebody who shared it, I said, this looks a fascinating study. Can you show me the study so I'd like to read it myself? And they said, well, we actually haven't read the study. And actually the study did not exist. There is no such study out there. There was just the asset management company, Arabesque, gave an interview to Reuters about this study, claiming to have found certain results, but with nothing to back it up. And I don't think we can accept these claims. Certainly, if you found the result in the wrong direction, in the direction you didn't want, you wouldn't believe it. You would say, can I look at the study? I'd like to pick it apart. But we should show the same skepticism for something that we do like as something that we don't. Because otherwise, if people who are, let's say, climate change deniers or diversity opponents are to say, actually, you're basing your stuff on non-existent work, then this actually hurts the diversity and climate change movement rather than helping it. So I think we need to apply the same standards to our own research as we would do to research that we perhaps don't like.
Right. And on that note of, skepticism, how do you think corporations can achieve or rebuild trust with consumers on an individual level?
I think there's various things that companies can do. So I think first is when companies make mistakes to acknowledge this and to say, okay, this was something that we just goofed. For example, a few years ago, I think Netflix was thinking about sort of separating two parts of its business, and then it said, no, we goofed. This was a mistake. Let's actually go back on this. Now, some people might say, this is a U-turn. Right? You're doing U-turns, but actually another word for U-turn is just listening to feedback. So if you're making a suggestion and there's feedback which is maybe very critical about it, and you act on that feedback, that should be praised rather than hurt. So I think the first thing to do is just listen to acknowledge when you've made mistakes. I think another thing to do in order to try to build customer trust is to realize that just small things like really, really matter. So often companies think that in response to any challenge, let me give loads of money to a charity. And so that creates some very big action. But actually, for customers, your day-to-day interactions may consider quite small things. So let's say I'm going to call up my bank, I'm on hold. Yeah, I understand that there is the need to queue because there's other customers. But are you going to be a bank which is going to offer me a callback facility so that actually I don't need to waste my half an hour? Or if you don't even offer that facility, do you give me the option to hold without music so that I can actually do a bit of work in my half an hour? And these are small things, but we're all time-pressed people. If we have to wait for half an hour unproductive time listening to their sort of hold music, then this is something which is just difficult. And so this is just to step into the shoes of a customer and think about what is it like to be a customer frustrated about a bank charge. Yeah, there are mistakes, but what's the way to solve it? If it is, I have to waste a half an hour of my time listening to hold music, that's different from being able to request a call back. So I do think that really these small acts of changing the small things might matter to a customer level much more than this big grandstanding action of giving a lot of money to charity.
Right. And Alex, I'll say we totally agree with you. I'll speak for everybody because we're all from the South and, we really do value that Southern hospitality. So it is the little things. And I kind of wanted to turn it over to Mya, kind of back on the post-truth stuff a little bit more. But she's got a great question for you too.
Yeah. So in your TEDx talk about what to trust in a post-truth world, you mentioned that what you look at is in your research is rigorous peer review journals that only accept around 5%. But as a Georgia college student, I'm sure I can speak for other students that don't have a lot of money and can't access those journals. What are some free, reliable sources that are available to the public that you would trust?
Yeah, thanks very much for asking that, Mya. So one of the unfortunate factors about the publishing industry is that many of these papers are behind a paywall. And there are good reasons for this. Fees are needed because in order to pay the people who review the papers and make sure that they're absolute high quality, that does cost money. And so there is fees attached to it. However, what people try to do is to make these resources as accessible as possible. So now many authors, myself included, can make your articles open access. So if I was to pay the publisher of the journal, I think about £2,000, something like that, that makes the article free to everybody. And I have research budgets sometimes which allow me to do that. So I will always make my articles open access wherever possible. Even if that is not the case, you can find these articles available for free on certain websites. So there's one website called the Social Science Research Network, or SSRN, and there you can always find the pre-publication version of an article. So let's say they've written the article in Microsoft Word. Obviously, the journal will then typeset it in its special font, but you can always find the Word version there, and it'll be almost exactly the same, except for maybe some formatting, stylistic changes. That's completely legal, so that's not a violation of copyright at all. That version is always there available for free. The publisher only has the copyright on the actual typeset version.
My last question for you tonight is, are you planning on writing another book, or is there anything in works for the future that you want to tease us on tonight?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for asking. So one which is just coming out next month, and you mentioned in the introduction, is this book, Principles of Corporate Finance. That's the book that I read when I was an undergrad. We were all given it at Morgan Stanley. And it's an honour to be invited to be a co-author of the 14th edition. So that's going to be out next month in April. And what I want to do is to put in a lot of the things that we've talked about today, like behavioural finance, the idea of irrationality psychology, sustainability and ESG. These are new finance topics, which may be a book which is in its 14th edition from being written in 1980s. They might not have put as much emphasis on the past. I really wanted to modernise the book for the issues that matter to business students and business practitioners in 2022. I have about 3 or 4 chapters into a new book based on actually the What to Trust in a Post-Truth World talk. I'm not sure what the title will be. One title that my agent and I are thinking about is Think Smarter. Another title might be Mastering Misinformation, but you sort of get the gist. It's how people's biases cause them to misinterpret information and then what to do about it. So how can we think rationally in a world in which you're seeing information from every channel? It's not just about business. What's the best way to bring up our kids? What's the best way to lose weight, to develop a habit? How can we sift out what is truthful from what's not? So hopefully that will be something which will be out, given how long it takes books to write, maybe in 1 or 2 years from now. But thank you for your interest in it when it does finally come out.
Great, lots of good things to look forward to.
Yeah, Alex, I just wanted to, extend a really warm thank you so much for meeting with us today. Excuse me. All of the work that you've done is insane. We are all huge fans, and we've all read the book. We all have seen your TEDx talks. It's been such a pleasure with you talking to you today. Did you have anything that you wanted to expand upon? I know we've only got 3 minutes left, but the world is your oyster. Feel free to expand upon more if you want.
Yeah, I think the only final thing that I would say is often people who think about sustainability, they think that's something that you should only be interested in if you want to go to a specific sustainability role, so work for an ESG investor or a CSR department. But this is now something which is mainstream. So all investors need to care about it. All chief executives or chief financial officers need to take this into account, because this is one of the main issues of the day. So I'd encourage everybody, despite your prior views on this topic, to realise I think this is one of the big futures of finance. And so hopefully that the work that I've done to try and make it accessible, there will be some resources to get up to speed on this topic.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. My name is Charlotte Joyner. Nick Lynch, and then
Mya Hassler.
Mya Hassler. Thank you so much. Dr. Ward Risvold's in the other room watching us, and I'm sure he says thank you too. It was such a pleasure talking to you today. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Mya. It's really great to be interviewed. Thank you for your interest in my work. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you too.